Chapter 30 of Kenilworth. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Kenilworth by Sir Walter Scott. Chapter 30. Now bid the steeple rock. She comes, she comes. Speak for us. Bells, speak for us. Shrill tongued tuckets. Stand to thy linstock, gunner. Let thy cannon play such a peal, as if a Paynim foe came stretched in turbaned ranks to storm the ramparts. We will have pageants too, but that craves wit, and I'm a rough-hewn soldier. The Virgin Queen, a tragi-comedy. Tressilian, when Wayland had left him, as mentioned in the last chapter, remained uncertain what he ought next to do, when Raleigh and Blount came up to him arm in arm, yet, according to their wont, very eagerly disputing together. Tressilian had no great desire for their society in the present state of his feelings, but there was no possibility of avoiding them, and indeed he felt that, bound by his promise not to approach Amy, or take any step in her behalf, it would be his best course at once to mix with general society, and to exhibit on his brow as little as he could of the anguish and uncertainty which sat heavy at his heart. He therefore made a virtue of necessity, and hailed his comrades with, "All mirth to you, gentlemen. Whence come ye?" "From Warwick, to be sure," said Blount. "We must needs home to change our habits, like poor players, who are fain to multiply their persons to outward appearance by change of suits, and you had better do the like, Tressilian." "Blount is right," said Raleigh. "The Queen loves such marks of deference, and notices, as wanting in respect, those who, not arriving in her immediate attendance, may appear in their soiled and ruffled riding dress. But look at Blount himself, Tressilian, for the love of laughter, and see how his villainous tailor hath apparelled him, in blue, green, and crimson, with carnation ribbons, and yellow roses in his shoes." "Why, what wouldst thou have?" said Blount. "I told the cross-legged thief to do his best, and spare no cost; and methinks these things are gay enough, gayer than thine own. I'll be judged by Tressilian." I agree," said Walter Raleigh. "Judge betwixt us, Tressilian, for the love of heaven." Tressilian, thus appealed to, looked at them both, and was immediately sensible at a single glance that honest Blount had taken upon the tailor's warrant the pied garments which he had chosen to make, and was as much embarrassed by the quantity of points and ribbons which garnished his dress, as a clown is in his holiday clothes, while the dress of Raleigh was a well fancied and rich suit, which the wearer bore as a garb too well adapted to his elegant person to attract particular attention. Tressilian said, therefore, that Blount's dress was finest, but Raleigh's the best fancied. Blount was satisfied with his decision. "I knew mine was finest," he said. "If that knave Doublestitch had brought me home such a simple doublet as that of Raleigh's, I would have beat his brains out with his own pressing iron. Nay, if we must be fools, ever let us be fools of the first head, say I." "But why gettest thou not on thy braveries, Tressilian?" said Raleigh. "I am excluded from my apartment by a silly mistake," said Tressilian, "and separated for the time from my baggage. I was about to seek thee, to beseech a share of thy lodging." "And welcome," said Raleigh; "it is a noble one. My Lord of Leicester has done us that kindness, and lodged us in princely fashion. If his courtesy be extorted reluctantly, it is at least extended far. I would advise you to tell your strait to the Earl's chamberlain. You will have instant redress." "Nay, it is not worth while, since you can spare me room," replied Tressilian. "I would not be troublesome. Has any one come hither with you?" "Oh, ay," said Blount, "Varney and a whole tribe of Leicestrians, besides about a score of us honest Sussex folk. We are all, it seems, to receive the Queen at what they call the Gallery Tower, and witness some fooleries there, and then we're to remain in attendance upon the Queen in the Great Hall. God bless the mark! While those who are now waiting upon her Grace get rid of their slough, and doff their riding suits. Heaven help me, if her Grace should speak to me, I shall never know what to answer." "And what has detained them so long at Warwick?" said Tressilian. unwilling that their conversation should return to his own affairs. "Such a succession of fooleries," said Blount, "as were never seen at Bartholomew Fair. We have had speeches and players, and dogs and bears, and men making monkeys, and women moppets of themselves. I marvel the Queen could endure it. But ever and anon came in something of the lovely light of her gracious countenance, or some such trash. Ah, vanity makes a fool of the wisest. But come, let us on to this same gallery tower, though I see not what thou, Tressilian, canst do with thy riding dress and boots." "I will take my station behind thee, Blount," said Tressilian, who saw that his friend's unusual finery had taken a strong hold of his imagination. "Thy goodly size and gay dress will cover my defects." "And so thou shalt, Edmund," said Blount. "In faith, I am glad thou thinkest my garb well fancied, for all Mr. Wittypate here; for when one does a foolish thing, it is right to do it handsomely." So saying, Blount cocked his beaver, threw out his leg, and marched manfully forward, as if at the head of his brigade of pikemen, ever and anon looking with complacence on his crimson stockings and the huge yellow roses which blossomed on his shoes. Tressilian followed, wrapped in his own sad thoughts, and scarce minding Raleigh, whose quick fancy, amused by the awkward vanity of his respectable friend, vented itself in jests which he whispered into Tressilian's ear. In this manner they crossed the long bridge or tilt yard, and took their station, with other gentlemen of quality, before the outer gate of the gallery or entrance tower. The whole amounted to about 40 persons, all selected as of the first rank under that of knighthood, and were disposed in double rows on either side of the gate, like a guard of honour, within the close hedge of pikes and partisans, which was formed by Leicester's retainers, wearing his liveries. The gentlemen carried no arms save their swords and daggers. These gallants were as gaily dressed as imagination could devise, and as the garb of the time permitted a great display of expensive magnificence, naught was to be seen but velvet and cloth of gold and silver, ribbons, feathers, gems, and golden chains. In spite of his more serious subjects of distress, Tressilian could not help feeling that he, with his riding suit, however handsome it might be, made rather an unworthy figure among these fierce vanities, and the rather because he saw that his deshabille was the subject of wonder among his own friends, and of scorn among the partisans of Leicester. We could not suppress this fact, though it may seem something at variance with the gravity of Tressilian's character. But the truth is, that a regard for personal appearance is a species of self-love, from which the wisest are not exempt, and to which the mind clings so instinctively, that not only the soldier advancing to almost inevitable death, but even the doomed criminal who goes to certain execution, shows an anxiety to array his person to the best advantage. But this is a digression. It was the twilight of a summer night, 9th July, 1575, the sun having for some time set, and all were in anxious expectation of the Queen's immediate approach. The multitude had remained assembled for many hours, and their numbers were still rather on the increase. A profuse distribution of refreshments, together with roasted oxen and barrels of ale set abroach in different places of the road, had kept the populace in perfect love and loyalty towards the Queen and her favourite, which might have somewhat abated had fasting been added to watching. They passed away the time, therefore, with the usual popular amusements of whooping, hallooing, shrieking, and playing rude tricks upon each other, forming the chorus of discordant sounds usual on such occasions. These prevailed all through the crowded roads and fields, and especially beyond the gate of the Chase, where the greater number of the common sort were stationed, when, all of a sudden, a single rocket was seen to shoot into the atmosphere, and, at the instant, far heard over flood and field, the great bell of the castle tolled. Immediately there was a pause of dead silence, succeeded by a deep hum of expectation, the united voice of many thousands, none of whom spoke above their breath, or, to use a singular expression, the whisper of an immense multitude. "They come now, for certain," said Raleigh. "Tressilian, that sound is grand. We hear it from this distance, as mariners, after a long voyage, hear upon their night watch the tide rush upon some distant and unknown shore." "Mass," answered Blount, "I hear it rather as I used to hear mine own kine lowing from the close of Winton's Westlow." "He will assuredly graze presently," said Raleigh to Tressilian. "His thought is all of fat oxen and fertile meadows. He grows little better than one of his own beeves, and only becomes grand when he is provoked to pushing and goring." "We shall have him at that presently," said Tressilian, "if you spare not your wit." "Tush, I care not," answered Raleigh. "But thou too, Tressilian, hast turned a kind of owl that flies only by night hast exchanged thy songs for screechings, and good company for an ivy tod." "But what manner of animal art thou thyself, Raleigh," said Tressilian, "that thou holdest us all so lightly?" "Who, I?" replied Raleigh. "An eagle am I, that never will think of dull earth while there is a heaven to soar in and a sun to gaze upon." "Well bragged, by Saint Barnaby!" said Blount. "But, good Master Eagle, beware the cage, and beware the fowler. Many birds have flown as high that I have seen stuffed with straw and hung up to scare kites. But hark, what a dead silence hath fallen on them at once!" "The procession pauses," said Raleigh, "at the gate of the Chase, where Sybil, one of the Fatidicae, meets the Queen to tell her fortune. I saw the verses. There is little savour in them, and her Grace has been already crammed full with such poetical compliments. She whispered to me during the Recorder's speech yonder, at Ford Mill, as she entered the liberties of Warwick, how she was pertassa Barbarae loquula." "The Queen whispered to him?" said Blount, in a kind of soliloquy. "Good God, to what will this world come?" His further meditations were interrupted by a shout of applause from the multitude, so tremendously vociferous that the country echoed for miles round. The guards thickly stationed upon the road by which the Queen was to advance caught up the acclamation, which ran like wildfire to the Castle, and announced to all within that Queen Elizabeth had entered the royal chase of Kenilworth. The whole music of the Castle sounded at once, and a round of artillery, with a salvo of small arms, was discharged from the battlements. But the noise of drums and trumpets, and even of the cannon themselves, was but faintly heard amidst the roaring and reiterated welcomes of the multitude. As the noise began to abate, a broad glare of light was seen to appear from the gate of the park, and broadening and brightening as it came nearer, advanced along the open and fair avenue that led towards the Gallery tower, and which, as we have already noticed, was lined on either hand by the retainers of the Earl of Leicester. The word was passed along the line, "The Queen! The Queen! Silence, and stand fast!" Onward came the cavalcade, illuminated by 200 thick waxen torches, in the hands of as many horsemen, which cast a light like that of broad day all around the procession, but especially on the principal group, of which the Queen herself, arrayed in the most splendid manner, and blazing with jewels, formed the central figure. She was mounted on a milk-white horse, which she reined with peculiar grace and dignity, and in the whole of her stately and noble carriage you saw the daughter of 100 kings. The ladies of the court who rode beside her Majesty had taken especial care that their own external appearance should not be more glorious than their rank, and the occasion altogether demanded, so that no inferior luminary might appear to approach the orbit of royalty. But their personal charms, and the magnificence by which, under every prudential restraint, they were necessarily distinguished, exhibited them as the very flower of a realm so far famed for splendour and beauty. The magnificence of the courtiers, free from such restraints as prudence imposed on the ladies, was yet more unbounded. Leicester, who glittered like a golden image with jewels and cloth of gold, rode on her Majesty's right hand, as well in quality of her host as of her master of the horse. The black steed which he mounted had not a single white hair on his body, and was one of the most renowned chargers in Europe, having been purchased by the Earl at large expense for this royal occasion. As the noble animal chafed at the slow pace of the procession, and arching his stately neck, champed on the silver bits which restrained him, the foam flew from his mouth, and speckled his well-formed limbs as if with spots of snow. The rider well became the high place which he held, and the proud steed which he bestrode. For no man in England, or perhaps in Europe, was more perfect than Dudley in horsemanship, and all other exercises belonging to his quality. He was bareheaded, as were all the courtiers in the train, and the red torchlight shone upon his long, curled tresses of dark hair, and on his noble features, to the beauty of which even the severest criticism could only object the lordly fault, as it may be termed, of a forehead somewhat too high. On that proud evening those features were all the grateful solicitude of a subject to show himself sensible of the high honour which the Queen was conferring on him, and all the pride and satisfaction which became so glorious a moment. Yet, though neither eye nor feature betrayed aught but feelings which suited the occasion, some of the Earl's personal attendants remarked that he was unusually pale, and they expressed to each other their fear that he was taking more fatigue than consisted with his health. Varney followed close behind his master, as the principal esquire in waiting, and had charge of his lordship's black velvet bonnet, garnished with a clasp of diamonds, and surmounted by a white plume. He kept his eye constantly on his master, and, for reasons with which the reader is not unacquainted, was among Leicester's numerous dependants the one who was most anxious that his lord's strength and resolution should carry him successfully through a day so agitating. For although Varney was one of the few, the very few, moral monsters who contrive to lull to sleep the remorse of their own bosoms, and are drugged into moral insensibility by atheism, as men in extreme agony are lulled by opium, yet he knew that in the breast of his patron there was already awakened the fire that is never quenched, and that his lord felt, amid all the pomp and magnificence we have described, the gnawing of the worm that dieth not. Still, however, assured as Lord Leicester stood, by Varney's own intelligence, that his Countess laboured under an indisposition which formed an unanswerable apology to the Queen for her not appearing at Kenilworth, there was little danger, his wily retainer thought, that a man so ambitious would betray himself by giving way to any external weakness. The train, male and female, who attended immediately upon the Queen's person, were of course of the bravest and the fairest, the highest born nobles and the wisest counsellors of that distinguished reign, to repeat whose names were but to weary the reader. Behind came a long crowd of knights and gentlemen, whose rank and birth, however distinguished, were thrown into shade, as their persons into the rear of a procession whose front was of such august majesty. Thus marshalled, the cavalcade approached the Gallery tower, which formed, as we have often observed, the extreme barrier of the castle. It was now the part of the huge porter to step forward, but the lubbard was so overwhelmed with confusion of spirit, the contents of one immense black jack of double ale, which he had just drunk to quicken his memory, having treacherously confused the brain it was intended to clear, that he only groaned piteously, and remained sitting on his stone seat. And the Queen would have passed on without greeting, had not the gigantic warder's secret ally, Flibbertigibbet, who lay perdu behind him, thrust a pin into the rear of the short femoral garment which we elsewhere described. The porter uttered a sort of yell, which came not amiss into his part, started up with his club, and dealt a sound douse or two on each side of him, and then, like a coach horse pricked by the spur, started off at once into the full career of his address, and by dint of active prompting on the part of Dickie Sludge, delivered, in sounds of gigantic intonation, a speech which may be thus abridged, the reader being to suppose that the first lines were addressed to the throng who approached the gateway, The conclusion, at the approach of the Queen, upon sight of whom, as struck by some heavenly vision, the gigantic warder dropped his club, resigned his keys, and gave open way to the goddess of the night, in all her magnificent train. What stir, what turmoil, have we for the nones? Stand back, my masters, or beware your bones. Sirs, I am a warder, and no man of straw. My voice keeps order, and my club gives law. Yet soft, nay, stay, wait. Vision, what have we here? What dainty darling's this? What peerless peer? What loveliest face that loving ranks unfold, like brightest diamond chased in purest gold? Dazzled and blind, mine office I forsake, my club, my key, my knee, my homage take. Bright paragon, pass on in joy and bliss, beshrew the gate that opes not wide at such a sight as this. Reader's note: This is an imitation of Gascoigne's verses spoken by the Herculean porter, as mentioned in the text. The original may be found in the republication of the Princely Pleasures of Kenilworth, by the same author, in the History of Kenilworth already quoted, Chiswick, 1821. End reader's note. Elizabeth received most graciously the homage of the Herculean porter, and bending her head to him in requital, passed through his guarded tower, from the top of which was poured a clamorous blast of warlike music, which was replied to by other bands of minstrelsy placed at different points on the castle walls, and by others again stationed in the chase, while the tones of the one, as they yet vibrated on the echoes, were caught up and answered by new harmony from different quarters. Amidst these bursts of music, which, as if the work of enchantment, seemed now close at hand, now softened by distant space, now wailing so low and sweet, as if that distance were gradually prolonged, until only the last lingering strains could reach the ear, Queen Elizabeth crossed the Gallery tower, and came upon the long bridge, which extended from thence to Mortimer's Tower, and which was already as light as day, so many torches had been fastened to the palisades on either side. Most of the nobles here alighted, and sent their horses to the neighbouring village of Kenilworth, following the Queen on foot, as did the gentlemen who had stood in array to receive her at the Gallery tower. On this occasion, as at different times during the evening, Raleigh addressed himself to Tressilian, and was not a little surprised at his vague and unsatisfactory answers, which, joined to his leaving his apartment without any assigned reason, appearing in an undress when it was likely to be offensive to the Queen, and some other symptoms of irregularity which he thought he discovered, led him to doubt whether his friend did not labour under some temporary derangement. Meanwhile, the Queen had no sooner stepped on the bridge than a new spectacle was provided, for as soon as the music gave signal that she was so far advanced, a raft, so disposed as to resemble a small floating island, illuminated by a great variety of torches, and surrounded by floating pageants, formed to represent sea-horses, on which sat Tritons, Nereids, and other fabulous deities of the seas and rivers, made its appearance upon the lake, and issuing from behind a small heronry, where it had been concealed, floated gently towards the farther end of the bridge. On the islet appeared a beautiful woman, clad in a watchet-coloured silken mantle, bound with a broad girdle, inscribed with characters like the phylacteries of the Hebrews. Her feet and arms were bare, but her wrists and ankles were adorned with gold bracelets of uncommon size. Amidst her long, silky black hair, she wore a crown of chaplet of artificial mistletoe, and bore in her hand a rod of ebony tipped with silver. Two nymphs attended on her, dressed in the same antique and mystical guise. The pageant was so well managed that this lady of the floating island, having performed her voyage with much picturesque effect, landed at Mortimer's Tower with her two attendants, just as Elizabeth presented herself before that outwork. The stranger then, in a well-penned speech, announced herself as that famous lady of the lake, renowned in the stories of King Arthur, who had nursed the youth of the redoubted Sir Launcelot, and whose beauty had proved too powerful both for the wisdom and the spells of the mighty Merlin. Since that earlier period she had remained possessed of her crystal dominions, she said, despite the various men of fame and might by whom Kenilworth had been successively tenanted. The Saxons, the Danes, the Normans, the Saintlows, the Clintons, the Montforts, the Mortimers, the Plantagenets, great though they were in arms and magnificence, had never, she said, caused her to raise her head from the waters which hid her crystal palace. But a greater than all these great names had now appeared, and she came in homage and duty to welcome the peerless Elizabeth to all sport which the castle and its environs, which lake or land, could afford. The Queen received this address also with great courtesy, and made answer in raillery, "We thought this lake had belonged to our own dominions, fair dame, but since so famed a lady claims it for hers, we will be glad at some other time to have further communion with you touching our joint interests." With this gracious answer the Lady of the Lake vanished, and Arion, who was amongst the maritime deities, appeared upon his dolphin. But Lambourne, who had taken upon him the part in the absence of Wayland, being chilled with remaining immersed in an element to which he was not friendly, having never got his speech by heart, and not having, like the porter, the advantage of a prompter, paid it off with impudence, tearing off his vizard and swearing, "Cog's bones! He was none of Arion or Orion either, but honest Michael Lambourne, that had been drinking her Majesty's health from morning till midnight, and was come to bid her heartily welcome to Kenilworth Castle." This unpremeditated buffoonery answered the purpose probably better than the set speech would have done. The Queen laughed heartily, and swore, in her turn, that he had made the best speech she had heard that day. Lambourne, who instantly saw his jest had saved his bones, jumped on shore, gave his dolphin a kick, and declared he would never meddle with fish again, except at dinner. At the same time that the Queen was about to enter the castle, that memorable discharge of fireworks by water and land took place, which Master Laneham, formerly introduced to the reader, has strained all his eloquence to describe. Such, says the clerk of the council chamber door, was the blaze of burning darts, the gleams of stars coruscant, the streams and hail of fiery sparks, lightnings of wildfire, and flight shot of thunderbolts, with continuance, terror, and vehemency, that the heavens thundered, the waters surged, and the earth shook. And for my part, hardy as I am, it made me very vengeably afraid. Reader's note. See Laneham's account of the Queen's entertainment at Killingworth Castle in 1575, a very diverting tract, written by as great a coxcomb as ever blotted paper. See note 6. The original is extremely rare, but it has been twice reprinted, once in Mr. Nicholls' very curious and interesting collection of the Progresses and Public Processions of Queen Elizabeth, Volume 1, and more lately in a beautiful antiquarian publication termed Kenilworth Illustrated, printed at Chiswick, for Meridew of Coventry and Radcliffe of Birmingham. It contains reprints of Laneham's letter, Gascoigne's princely progress, and other scarce pieces, annotated with accuracy and ability. The author takes the liberty to refer to this work as his authority for the account of the festivities. I am indebted for a curious ground plan of the Castle of Kenilworth, as it existed in Queen Elizabeth's time, to the voluntary kindness of Richard Padnall, Esquire, of Olivebank, near Liverpool. From his obliging communication, I learn that the original sketch was found among the manuscripts of the celebrated J. Rousseau, when he left England. These were entrusted by the philosopher to the care of his friend Mr. Davenport, and passed from his legatee into the possession of Mr. Badnall. End reader's note. End chapter 30.